Hey everyone, welcome to today's session. This is part of my verbal content series on GMAT Club's YouTube channel. So, welcome to today's session, which is all about boldface, one of the trickiest question types on the GMAT. It's somewhat of a boogeyman. A lot of us are afraid of this question type. Give me 2 hours. I hope to remove some of that fear, right? So, excellent to see you. Now, I hope you guys can see me. First, let me know if you can see me and hear me so that way I know that the audio and the video are coming fine. Meanwhile, let me tell you about what's in store. Today is all about boldface. We're going to discuss everything. This is going to be like a crash course for you. Everything you need to know in terms of the conceptuals, how to find the conclusion when it's actually tricky to find out the conclusion, a little bit of process which is scalable, which can help you solve even the toughest questions out there, and of course along the way some principles and so on and so forth. So great to see you. Meanwhile, let me share my screen, but please say hi so that it doesn't feel like I'm talking to a wall, right? So let's get right to it. For a second, you should be able to see an infinity screen, but we should be able to see at this point. So guys, let me know if you can see the screen pretty well and you can hear me well. So I'll wait for a couple of seconds till I start seeing feedback. Hey Rishika, good to see you here. Hi Manan. Will we solve 700 questions as well? Definitely a few of them. You'll have to wait till the end though, because I am going to set up the conceptuals and we're going to start small. But yeah, be patient. We'll definitely do a few of those as well. Right. Monica, Akhilesh, Rishika, thanks for participating. It really means a lot because that means that, you know, it's not just me talking to a wall, right? So I can see that you guys can see my screen and you can hear me well. So let's get right into business. So today is part 3 of my verbal content series. This session is on boldface. Now, in the YouTube description for this session, you would find the previous 2 sessions. Those are on inference and assumption. For some of you who are looking for help on that, maybe that video is for you. Those videos are for you. And I also have good news to share. I am doing my next session next week. So if anybody is looking forward to strengthen and weekend, that's coming right up. I did see quite a lot of you telling me that the sessions are kind of few and far between, so we need to increase the frequency. We've been listening to you. So the next session is coming right up. All right. So let's kind of get right into it. My unipoint objective of today is to help you get better at critical reasoning, boldface, right? It's a somewhat tricky question type, provided you are not yet equipped to solve it. Once you're equipped to solve it, it's actually one of the easier question types for the major part. So what are we going to discuss today? In brief, certain concepts that you should know. As always, I am all about process. So I'm going to try and give you my process, which works well for me. And hopefully you'll also see some benefit from it. And of course, some traps, some principles. I also want to kind of mention and highlight about some edge cases that we see, even if we don't solve too many of them today. But let's get right to it, right? So this is just a sneak peek into what is coming. By the time we are done, we have covered a lot of this. That's the hope. So let's get right to it. Now, if I talk about boldface in general, and I mean like 95% of the time, boldface is an argument-based question type. There's a small, 5% perhaps where you'll get a scenario where it's not really an argument, but that's very rare. Pretty much 95% of the time, boldface means it's an argument-based question. So first, conceptually, let's ensure that we're clear about arguments. And for those of you who attended my previous session, this might overlap a little bit, but bear with me, let's get this done. So here's your first exercise for the day, getting right into it. Before I bombard you with theory, tell me which of this is a passage, which of this is an argument, or is both a passage, is both an argument, just let me know. All right, I can see some responses coming in. Thanks for that. I think most of us are aligned to this. It's a fairly easy question to start. It's a nice juicy warm up. First one seems to be a passage. Second one seems to be an argument. And all of you who told me that, all of you are right. So let's kind of dive a little deep into why we call this a passage or why not an argument, right? So if I look at each and every sentence here, it's not oriented towards something. It's not, there's no central idea that all of these sentences are trying to communicate. It's just a set of stats. It's just a set of facts that the author has just, shot out one by one. Photosynthesis converts light energy into chemical engineering. Great. Plants absorb sunlight through chlorophyll. Great. All of that is okay. But none of those, they're not coalescing into telling you one big picture idea, right? And that's why this is not an argument. On the other hand, the second case I gave you is what we call in critical reasoning as an argument. Why? Every sentence there is invariably trying to build the case for the author being the person who wrote this argument, to make this point. So firstly, the author told you some context about mocks. He's establishing the relevance of mocks with regard to the GMAT. Okay, people typically take these mocks towards the end of their prep. Great. Then came the critical piece. Given that Prince scored a 675 on his latest GMAT mock, the author is jumping to this conclusion that Prince is likely to get a 675 on the actual GMAT. So you can see how these ideas connect to kind of communicate this central idea. Central idea being that he's going to get a 675, he's likely to get a 675 on the actual GMAT. So what exactly is an argument? There's a clear central idea that is being claimed by the author. So I'm using all these terms intentionally. It's a clear central idea being claimed by the author, plus some statements that at an overall level, build the case for or support this central idea. Everybody clear with this? So just to summarize, what is an argument? It's a central idea or a claim, a central claim, plus some statements that overall build the case for that central idea. Now, you might be wondering why I'm using this overall here. Because in a typical CR argument, you may not always see every statement explicitly supporting the central idea. For example, I might give you an argument which looks like this. So there is a scholar. That scholar, based on some particular data, that scholar concludes X. Now, the author comes in and says X is not true, and then the author justifies it some way. If I give you a statement, if I give you an argument like this, clearly X not being true is, the main conclusion. That's what's coming from the author. But the statement X, which is the scholar's conclusion, you would not say it's supporting the central idea, right? It's kind of being countered by the author there. So there are certain statements that don't necessarily support the central idea. So this demands a little bit of a nuanced discussion. So boldface often has certain such interesting kind of nuanced components, things that seem to go against, and so on and so forth. So one of the most important aspects of doing well in boldface is having some clarity, some level of clarity on some of those key terms. So let's get right into it. Meanwhile, quick feedback, anything that is not clear so far, I'm just gonna take 30 seconds to just get your feedback so far. Are you with me? Am I going too fast? Am I going too slow? Just let me know. So I do want to bear with me a little bit for the theory, because boldface does have a certain level of theory. I do imagine with the next session, that strength and weaken, there's not going to be much theory, it's just solving problems. But today there is a little bit of theory. Bear with me. Yeah. Clear till now? Clear. Thank you. That's great. Let's keep moving. Here is your first real exercise of the day. So I have this argument. There is something which is bolded. What role does the bolded portion play in the argument? Let me know. So I should also make sure, I don't know how many of you guys have read this instruction. Multiple answers may be right. So I see a lot of C. Is there something else which fits? If something else fits, let me know. Or is it only C? I like that question, Jaival. That's all that stuff is what we are doing this discussion for. We have to make sure we're clear on some of these terms. Ah, B and D. Okay. Now I see a few more compound answers. There's B and D. A lot of us say it's only C. Okay, that's clear. Some of us say B and D. Some of us say B, C, and D. So now, there's a lot of variance in the answer choices. Good. B can also be true. Great. But I can see that in the initial round, a lot of us went for C and only C. So let me, spring a surprise there. B and D are the actual answers. For those of you who think this is a claim, I do have a bit of a surprise for you. Right? So when you say B is out since it's not a fact, I'm kind of gonna, tilt that understanding a little bit. So bear with me. Now that we have tried a very interesting question, now let's kind of get into what's happening with regard to facts and claims. That's the first terms. These are the first terms that we need to know, right? So yeah, Jaival, we'll come to that. Hold on. In 5 minutes, we should have some clarity on this. So when I'm talking about, when I say key terms, I mean what role would you consider this particular statement to have in an argument? So if something is a fact in an argument versus something is a claim, something is a conclusion, think about all these definitions, all these items I'm talking about in terms of what would you consider the role of that in an argument. Okay. So firstly, what is a fact? The first aspect about fact, the first way to look at fact is something that's objectively true. Here is an example. If in an argument you see the statement, the earth revolves around the sun, this is objectively true in real life. No author of the argument is going to say that this is not true. So if this is given, if you see a statement like this, or if you see this photosynthesis example that we talked about, photosynthesis, these are objectively true statements in real life. Something like this, which is verifiably true, objectively true, this is definitely a fact. You see that it's a fact. There's no two ways about it. What is also a fact, what is also playing the role of a fact in your typical argument is something that you may not be able to say is objectively true because you don't have enough context, but it's presented as a truth by the author. Now, let's look at this sentence. And remember the context it was in. So Prince scored a 675 on his latest GMAT mock. Therefore, we go on to conclude that Prince will get, 675 on his actual GMAT. Now, we have no idea who Prince is. Did Prince really score a 675 on his latest GMAT mock? Actually, we don't know. But this is given to us by the author as a fact. The author is telling us, yes, this is the fact, take it. Is this clear? Similarly, if I give you the statement, Jake is taller than Charles, you can ask the question, how do we know that? How do we know that's really true? We don't know Jake, we don't know Charles. But since the author has presented that as a truth to us, we take it as a fact. Is fact clear? So these are the kind of things that you'd say, yeah, this is definitely a factual statement here, as far as boldface is concerned. Quick show of hands. Because a lot of us did go in the opposite direction with this, I'm gonna spend a little bit of time on this, make sure that we're all, pretty confident with this. So now we have kind of understood what a factual statement on the GMAT means, on boldface means. Now let's talk about, something called claim. Now, a fact is something that is either objectively true or is presented, the author is just telling you this is true. There's no two ways about it. A claim is something that the author asserts to be true, or the author is kind of making this claim that it's true. You can always ask the question, is it really true? There is always a question mark. So objective truths won't fit in here, but subjective opinions. For example, we should stop selling product X. If you see this in an argument, that's not a fact. That's the author's very subjective opinion. That is his judgment, belief, whatever it is. Those things fall into this bucket called claim, right? Now, look at this one. Global warming is likely to destroy the earth. I'm making a prediction into the future. There's no way we know that for a fact. I'm guessing, I'm making this claim that global warming is likely to destroy the earth in the distant future. So these kinds of statements typically fall into this bucket called claims. But in between this, you have opinions, judgments, beliefs, views. They have very small micro differences, but they all fall into this big bucket called claims. For example, For example, if you ask me what's the difference between an opinion and a claim, practically not much. I have an opinion. If it's in my mind, it's just my opinion or belief. The minute I blurt it out, verbally, or I put it out on paper, I've just claimed that thing. So practically there's no difference between these items. All of them, fall under this bucket called claims. So I hope claim and fact at some level is clear. If this is clear, now we can kind of see why some of us went wrong with this particular aspect. So Jaiwal had a great question. Isn't it a speculation? Actually, there's a small trick I played here. You have to notice what I put in bold. If I go back to the question, right? So the entire sentence is in bold. So the way you interpret also changes based on what's the bolded role. What is the bolded portion exactly? And therefore, what role does the bolded portion play? And some of us gave the answer B and D or B or D. You guys figured this out, right? So let's look at the second piece first. Economists anticipate that inflation will drop below 2% next quarter. Great. Now, economists are anticipating this thing. Will inflation really drop below 2%? It's a prediction into the future. There's no way I know this for a fact. You could not call this a fact. Therefore, this is a claim. This is an opinion that the economists have. This is a claim that they're making. They anticipate this. If this was what was bolded, you would have said it's a claim. On the other hand, let's talk about this portion. Economists anticipate that inflation will drop below 2% next quarter. Now, it's obviously a claim that whether or not inflation will drop below 2%. We don't know that for sure. But is it not a fact? Isn't the author telling you as a matter of fact that, hey, boss, there are these economists, they've kind of anticipated something. That's a fact, right? What they've anticipated might be a claim, right? That's a prediction into the future. But is it not a factual truth that, hey, there are these economists and they have made this particular estimate? They have kind of anticipated something, right? So I hope you guys see the nuance there. So what the feedback there is, you have to really pay attention to what is bolded exactly to kind of determine whether you would consider it a fact or a claim. Would you call it an evidence? Would you call it a prediction? All those things kind of depend on a lot of things. So you can see the difference. Great. So Stara, it says anticipate, right? Yeah. An anticipation is I anticipate that this will happen, which is kind of why if I just looked at this sentence, this bolded portion, that's a claim. I cannot say it's a fact. But it's kind of a fact. The author is kind of telling you as a fact that, hey, there are these economists, they've anticipated something, and they've whatever they've anticipated, that inflation will drop below 2%. The fact that the economists anticipated, that's a fact, right? So I hope that helped. So, but to determine, okay, that's a great question. But to determine the nature of the boldface, won't we instinctively read the entire sentence to get the context? Yeah, you need to read the entire sentence to get the context. But when you're answering questions, you need to hyper focus on what's important. So those are great questions, by the way. Thanks for that. So I hope you see that, right? Now, if you get a question where, making sure this distinction is clear was important, hopefully, you would have got it next time. You'll catch it next time. So let's continue with this, somewhat theoretical discussion on certain aspects like that, which terms that I think you should know. Let's talk about another somewhat tricky piece, which is evidence. So what is evidence? With all of boldface, I want you to think in terms of real life. Your critical reasoning, and this goes beyond boldface, it's an extension of real life. So in a lot of things, if you want to understand what a term means, think real life. So what would be evidence? Evidence is something that I'm using to support a certain idea, right? So, I have some evidence to prove something. That's essentially what evidence is. So it's a statement, data point, observation, or a piece of information. End of the day, it is some piece of information that kind of supports some other piece of information, right? That's what evidence is. Now, if you generally go and check in the literature, a lot of people do think that evidence is purely a factual thing. Evidence is usually factual. Usually it's some data point, it's some observation, it's some study result, and so on and so forth. But it does not always have to be a fact. Now, and again, if you think real life, you can understand. I'll give you an example. In a court of law, let's say I am on trial for murder. Please don't judge me, it's just an example. So I am on trial for murder. You are being called to give witness testimony. You are a witness. You claim that you saw me commit murder. So your claim about being a witness to me committing a murder, it would still be filed in as evidence, right? To try and prove me guilty. Again, don't judge me. So you do see cases where evidence need not always be a piece of fact, but those are usually facts. So another aspect of boldface that I really do want to impress upon you is keep an open mind, keep a flexible mind. That's also very important. So yeah, evidence is essentially any piece of information that's kind of supporting or justifying a certain conclusion claim, right? So I hope this is also clear. Yeah, in boldface, can there be overlap? Like a fact is also an evidence. Yeah, a lot of times evidence are facts. That's my point. Uh, Fair enough. It could still be wrong because it is anticipated. So how then does this not? So, Sarah, the anticipated idea, whatever was anticipated was that inflation will drop. That's a claim, but the overall sentence is a fact. Is it not true that economists have anticipated something about inflation? Think about that. Okay. I hope that comes in. I mean, I hope that gives a little bit of clarity there, but we'll come back to it. So we have kind of covered all the terms that we needed to cover to understand why B and D are the right answers here. Again, the bolded section is actually factual in nature. This entire bolded portion, if because the question is very specific, what role does the entire bolded portion play? That is a fact in this argument. If I asked you what role does this portion play, that's clearly an anticipated idea. The economists have anticipated that this is going to happen. That's a prediction into the future. Okay. So, firstly, I think I'm happy to see nobody chose A. It's clearly not the main conclusion. So, let's talk about choice B. Is it a fact? Yeah, this entire statement, yeah, it is a fact. That's not wrong at all. Is it used to support the main conclusion of the argument? Yes, this is the main conclusion. So is it a claim? It's not a claim. You can reject this for that reason. Is it evidence? Yeah, it is something that's used to again provide support to a claim. So there was a good question earlier. Is a conclusion a claim? So it's coming later, but it's also answered here. Every conclusion by default is also considered to be a claim. So D would also be a right answer to this question. So everybody with me so far? I hope I've answered the doubts to a certain extent. If there's still something there, please put it on. I will come to it. Right? Of course, as quickly as I can. But quick show of hands, can I move on? Because now we'll go to another exercise and some more terms that I'm trying to build familiarity with. And by the way, nothing here is to be by-hearted or mugged up. Everything here is to just be understood. It's all about general common sense, nothing more. Right? So, quick show of hands, just let me know if you guys are good. Can I move on? Yeah, can evidence be a claim? That's my point. Usually, evidence is a fact, but there are cases, an evidence could be a claim. Something which is a claim could be used as evidence. It could be considered as evidence. So I'm a little more flexible with that definition. Okay. So all I'll say is keep an open mind. Don't just assume that evidence has to be a fact. Okay. Great question. So here's your next exercise. Again, very similar. What role does the bolded portion play in the argument? And remember, multiple answers can be right. All right, happy to see some answers come in. B and E has been chosen. A, B, and E has also been chosen. A and E has also been chosen. So I think a lot of us are clear about E being okay. A and B, there seems to be a bit of a, uh, something going on there. A and E, all right. So here we are going to get into these concepts called intermediate conclusion, a conclusion, the conclusion, all of that. Okay. So, just a sneak peek, these are the answers. So if you chose A, B, and E, that means you got everything right. Otherwise, there's still something you can extract from this particular portion of theory. So let's get right to it. We'll come back to that. So we already know what a premise is. We kind of discussed it already, but just to kind of hammer that idea home, a premise is any statement that kind of provides support to another statement. That statement that's getting supported is a conclusion. That statement that's providing support is a premise. We are already familiar with this. And another thing I wanted to kind of make sure you understand is technically even a claim can be used as a premise, just like evidence could also be a claim, right? A premise can also be a claim. I could use a claim to support another claim. That other claim would be my conclusion. Now here's an example of that. Now you can judge this argument all you want, but it is an argument. And let's say I give you this first statement: I believe that rationality is highly overrated as a trait. Again, don't judge me for these arguments. So I believe that rationality is highly overrated as a trait. And based on this idea, based on this belief that I have, I'm kind of going and making this conclusion, which is, hey, therefore, one should not be overly rational in dealing with situations. Is this an argument? Yes. Is this the main conclusion? Yes. Is this a premise? Yes. But it's also not a fact. It's my belief, and my belief is being used to arrive at a conclusion, right? So, just as something, the reason we have to discuss this is because in our typical other argument based questions, right, there also we have premises which can be claims. But what happens, let's say, in your standard assumption or strengthen or weaken question is, for the sake of figuring out the assumption strengthener or weakener, we consider all the premises to be true. Yeah, we believe that whether it's a fact or claim doesn't matter. If it's a premise, it's considered to be true. And therefore we have this idea that premise is a fact. It's a fact as far as that particular argument, trying to find the assumption is concerned. But a premise can be a claim. I hope this idea is also clear. Okay. So we are coming to intermediate conclusion right away, Jack. That's, I think, coming right up in 1 minute. So I hope this is clear. What is premise is clear. What is conclusion? We know this already. A conclusion is any statement that is supported by some other statement. So if some statement is being used to justify some other statement, this final statement that's being justified is a conclusion, right? Now, in the argument that I gave you about rationality, the second statement is the conclusion that I'm making, right? Now, a small nuance here which we should know is every conclusion is by definition a claim. The reason for that is, irrespective of how good or bad the argument is, when I'm making a conclusion based on some logic, based on some reasoning, I'm asserting that this particular statement is true. I'm making the claim that this is true, right? Now, you'll be surprised if I gave you an argument like this: X is taller than Y. These kinds of arguments you don't see on the GMAT, but I'm just illustrating a point here. If I give you an argument which says X is taller than Y is taller than Z, therefore X is taller than Z, X is taller than Z, right? Now, is this an argument? Yes. Is there a main conclusion? Yes. Is that main conclusion a claim? I would say yes, because I'm still asserting based on the other two premises that X is taller than Z, right? So is it a claim? Yes. But is that claim also factually true in this context, in this scenario? Yes. So even a factually true, objective truth kind of conclusion, because it's being claimed in that particular scenario, it's still considered as a claim. It's not wrong to call it a claim. So what you're seeing here is a very rare example where a conclusion, it's of course a conclusion. Because it's a conclusion, by definition, it's a claim, but it's also factually true. So don't have this mindset that fact and claim cannot coexist together. That's also it's a bit of a myth. So I hope this is clear. One of the key ideas which we need to know is every conclusion is a claim. Every claim is not necessarily a conclusion. So every conclusion by default is a claim. But so for example, this statement 2, it's a conclusion, but it's also a claim. Every claim need not be a conclusion. So this statement 1 that you see here, I believe that rationality is highly overrated as a trait. That's just my belief. At this point, it is just a claim that I'm making. It's my belief system. When I, verbally spit it out, or when I type it out, I'm making that claim, right? So this belief that rationality is highly overrated trait, it's clearly a claim, but it's not a conclusion because I haven't supported the statement with any logic. There is nothing to support this idea, this belief that rationality is highly overrated. So I hope these definitions are seeping into your brain. The objective is not to mug up any of this, I'm just building familiarity for you, nothing more. Now let's come to what Jack is also talking about, intermediate conclusions. Now, intermediate conclusion, as the name suggests, the one way to quickly remember it is it's never the main conclusion. It is, as the name suggests, some intermediate conclusion that exists in the argument. It's typically supporting some other conclusion. So based on some premise, I might make some conclusion. Now this conclusion, if it somehow supports some final conclusion, this would be my intermediate conclusion, this would be my main conclusion. That's all there is to it. Now, to answer the fantastic question there, Jack, all intermediate conclusions are premises. Since they are supporting the final conclusions, you are absolutely right. And intermediate conclusion is always also a premise. Why? Because it is supporting some other final conclusion. It is a premise. So here is a quick and easy example to absorb that in. Today is a public holiday. Based on the fact that today is a public holiday, I'm making the conclusion that, hey, this restaurant must be busy tonight. It's going to be busy tonight. Now, based on this conclusion that the restaurant is going to be busy tonight, I'm kind of drawing this final conclusion. The final point I want to convince you of, the final point I really want you to take away is, hey, we better make a reservation before we go. I expect the restaurant to be busy because today is public holiday. So let's be safe. We should make a reservation before we go. This is the final conclusion or the main conclusion. In bold is what we call an intermediate conclusion. This intermediate conclusion serves as a premise for the final conclusion. It is a premise in the argument. So I hope this clarifies some of these other key terms. So another key, trick point that we sometimes see in boldface questions is in answer choices, you'd see all these terms. Whenever you see the conclusion, that is always referring to the main conclusion. Typically, let me not use the word always, have a flexible mind. Typically, the conclusion refers to the main conclusion. When you see the word intermediate conclusion, it's pretty much never the main conclusion. When you see the word a conclusion, and sometimes you see a choice which says a conclusion, and if you did not pay attention to this very innocent looking article, you will interpret everything the wrong way and you'll go wrong. So when you see a choice which says a conclusion, think logically it can refer to any of the conclusions in the argument. If there are 3 conclusions, it could refer to any of the 3 conclusions, right? Keep that in mind. Don't assume that it's referring to the main conclusion. Now, another term that you always see, and sometimes you see this particular phrasing, what position does the argument take? Or boldface 2 is the position that the argument takes, or it's the position that the argument opposes. A position, and think about a debate or sitting in a boardroom. The position you take is the stand that you take. It's the view that I have, it's the stand that I take, right? So it's technically my opinion, it's my subjective opinion or belief. So position is also under the bucket of claims. It's technically the the viewpoint which I have. So I might take a position on a certain argument. So I believe that veganism is not as healthy as it looks. Now that's my position on veganism. That's my view on veganism. That's a position. That's a claim, right? When would that position be a conclusion? If I justify my position using some reasoning. So it's practically same to same as claim. When you see the phrasing, the position the argument takes, this is usually proxy for main conclusion. So what is the position that the argument overall takes? That's the main conclusion. That is the main conclusion, right? So I hope all of this is clear. Position can be a premise as well, right? Great question. Yeah. So because even an intermediate conclusion could be a position, right? Or there could be, let me give you the example right here. I could have an opposing position. So even my intermediate conclusion is a position, technically. Any conclusion is also a position, right? Because the conclusion that I'm making is the position that I'm taking, in simple words. So you're right, it could be a premise. So sometimes you have these cases, right, where the author eventually wants to go against some idea. So there is an opposing view, a kind of an alternate view, some kind of opposing conclusion in some cases, if the author justifies it, right? So if you look at this example, some people argue that working from home reduces productivity because of so and so reason. Then the author comes in and says, however, recent studies show that remote workers actually, complete some tasks, they complete more tasks, and based on this, the author is making the conclusion that companies should embrace work policies, which kind of is in the opposite direction of what you see here. So this original boldface portion is like an opposing view that eventually the argument is taking a stand against at some level, right? So just some ideas I've thrown in here. With that, we have everything it takes to answer this question. So today is a public holiday, therefore the restaurant must be busy tonight. So we should make a reservation before we go. The bolded portion is an intermediate conclusion. This final statement is the main conclusion. Again, remember, usually a call to action is typically a main conclusion, because eventually a call to action is the author is asking you to do something. The author is telling that, hey, we should do this. Those are usually main conclusions. So I hope most of you are clear that choice A must be right. Notice it is a conclusion. I didn't say it is the conclusion. So the boldface portion, is it a conclusion? The answer is yes. It is in fact the intermediate conclusion here. So this would be true. So for a lot of you did reject A. So I hope you guys are clear. It is a premise for the argument is also true, because Jack already discussed this. It is true. An intermediate conclusion is typically a premise for the overall argument, right? It's the conclusion of the argument as a whole. I'm happy to see none of you went for this. Most of you didn't go for this. It's a position in the argument that is true. This portion is not wrong at all. Where is the issue for which no justification is provided? No, it's kind of justified, right? I am arriving at this idea that the restaurant must be busy tonight based on the fact that today is a public holiday. So is it right to say that no justification is provided for the bolded portion? No, justification is provided. That's the reason this is wrong. It's not wrong to say it's a position. Okay. E is of course right. I think it's a very standard template. It is an intermediate conclusion, kind of supports the main conclusion. It's all true. I hope this is clear. Let me just look at the questions then. Position can be a premise. I think we discussed that. Can premise and evidence be used equally in every scenario, and can there be any difference? They're pretty much interchangeable. That's a great question. Pretty much interchangeable. I've never seen boldface questions where you had to differentiate between the two to get the right answer. Never happens. Has never happened. Because every evidence is something that supports a certain idea. Premise is also something that supports the idea. I don't know how you could really differentiate it. Typically, evidence is more stats, figures, some observation. That's the only thing you could say, but not a hard distinction at all. Those are practically interchangeable. Today is a public holiday is an argument? No, that's a fact. The author is telling you a fact. Hey boss, today is a public holiday. Okay, that's clearly not an argument. We can use since therefore to check for ICNC. Great question. I have an entire section just dedicated to that. So we're gonna get into that. But you're right. Often you have these nice indicating words. There will be a therefore, there will be a since. They give you a sense of how to figure out what is what, right? So great questions. Happy to see that participation. Now, there are, of course, what we discussed is not each and every boldface term, and that's not the point. I don't want you mugging up any of these things. The idea was just to build a little bit of familiarity with some of the things I think you must know. For the rest, use common sense. When somebody says circumstance, think about circumstance in real life, right? A circumstance is basically, it's the circumstances I'm in, it's the scenario I'm in. Think logically, put yourself there. A lot of this is understandable, right? So you would have a lot of different words. Invariably, once in a while, you'll see a boldface question where you'll see a term that you haven't seen before in a boldface context. Your job is to just think real life and figure it out. Usually, it's more than enough. If I give you the word objection, right, you can figure out what an objection means, right? I'm objecting to something, right? So things like that. So consideration is basically evidence or premise, right? Yeah, a consideration is something that I'm taking into account. So as the name says, I have to consider this in order to, either make a point or, go against a point. So typically it is a premise indicator. It is a premise. I'm taking this into consideration in order to do something. That's how I would look at it. Just keeping it very, very simple, right? Think real life. So with that, let's get into some more interesting portions where we get to a little more solving. I hope you guys are looking forward to that. Let's observe what a typical boldface looks like. And let's not do it theoretically. Let's do a warm-up question. Just solve and let me know what the answer is. And while you're here, feel free to like that video. Let the algo also know if you're finding some benefit from this. Let's solve this. Yeah, good to see some answers come in. Let's take another 30 seconds or something. All right. So that's a good question, Jack. A random fact which is not supporting anything in the argument can't be a premise. I don't disagree with you. I would call that a context. Sometimes you would have a random fact which is not supporting anything in the argument, but it's just there to provide context, right? So yeah, I'm happy to see that none of you struggled with this. I would expect that it's not a tough question, but I thought let's use this question to get into the feel for boldface, right? So what does a boldface question typically look like? Again, 95% of the time you see two bolded portions, and this could be any two bolded portions. Don't assume that whatever is in bold is necessarily important. There's nothing like that. Any portion of the passage could be of the argument could be bolded. We don't know anything about how important or not important that is. Just because it's bolded doesn't mean it's important. Yeah, but usually two portions are bolded, and you're asked what is pretty much standard question: what role do these two portions in boldface play as far as this argument is concerned? So it's pretty much a very standardized template. which is a great thing at least. Uh, they only get you with the choices. They don't put any traps in the question stem, right? And you also have to observe the choices because you're being asked questions about two boldface items, two bolded items. The choices also have this bifurcation. Usually, you would see that the choice talks about two things. So even here, you don't see that bifurcation, but it's telling you the first and the second, right? It talks about two components always, right? So let's quickly solve this. I can see none of you struggled with this. That's happy to see that. I mean, it's expected. Happy to see that. But let's kind of quickly run through it. So what's happening here? Because the Coke stoppers and wine bottles. So the author is kind of beginning to set up, give up, put all the premises in. So it's telling you that the current, not the current, but the cork stoppers have some problem. They become moldy, they crumble, so on and so forth, kind of building the case for the plastic stopper to come in. Now we're introducing bottle master and it's telling you it's pretty good, it doesn't leak or crumble or mold. Then you have boldface 1, which I'm sure everybody got this. It's supporting the main conclusion. It's telling you that, hey, right now it's only slightly costlier than your cork stopper. Then you add to that the second piece of information: cork prices are going to increase considerably. So the implication there is this one is only slightly higher right now. Cork price is going to keep going up, which means at some point the plastic stoppers are going to be cheaper. Therefore comes this main conclusion idea that Bottle Master is going to increase its market share with its plastic stoppers. So I think it's pretty clear. So in terms of thinking about what these two bold faces are, all of you realize boldface 2 is your main conclusion, boldface 1 is some kind of premise or evidence supporting the main conclusion, right? So all of you are right here. We could discuss this, but I think all of you are clear. I'm not gonna bore you with that because I have other questions, tougher questions that we need to do. So let's focus on the takeaways. Boldface is a pretty much standardized question stem. We know that even the answer choices usually have this format. Don't assume that whatever is bolded is important. One of the things I really want you to observe here is boldface is really a test of your ability to understand structure. That's actually what you've done here, right? There's of course the subject matter which you've understood, but beyond the subject matter, you're kind of looking structurally. Okay, this is the conclusion, the author is supporting it with this premise, and the author is bringing in that information. What you're doing is looking at structure. So in this aspect, boldface is similar to questions like flaw, method of reasoning, and even your entire RC is kind of a detailed exercise in structure. So very important. So I think all of you observed one thing, and all of you saw this live as you solved this question. One of the critical pieces to getting boldface questions right is identifying the main conclusion when it's there. 95% of the cases, it will be there, right? Being able to identify the main conclusion is super important. Therefore, let's talk about how to find the main conclusion. Here's the first example. It's a simple example. Just quickly tell me what is the main conclusion, and then we'll get into it. Yeah, is it necessary to read the whole passage or we can just read the boldface? I am coming to that, Akash. I'm sorry, my apologies. I'm coming to that, Akshay. But short answer, no, you have to read the entire thing, in my opinion, in my very humble opinion. So yeah, just tell me which statement is the main conclusion. Yeah, so yeah, I don't know why it took a little bit of time for that to the comments to load in. So must have been a temporary tech glitch. Yeah, so let's see. Second sentence, second line, first line. First line, okay. Quarterly profits. All right. So the main conclusion is actually the second line. The first line, if you really think about it, it's again telling you this is what happened, right? The company's quarterly profits, hey, it actually has risen. The profit has increased even though the sales has kind of remained at the same level. Based on this, the author is kind of hypothesizing about what must have happened to enable this. And the author, notice the phrasing, this is a good clue. And the author is kind of hypothesizing, oh, this is what must have happened. The company must have implemented significant cost cutting measures. It kind of makes sense, right? Typically, if your sales is remaining the same, all things being equal, you would expect profit to stay the same. If profit is increasing despite sales staying the same, despite revenue staying the same, probably your cost has come down, right? So some kind of cost cutting might have happened. That's kind of the conclusion here. So some of you did get this wrong. A lot of you did get it right. So for those of you who chose one, is this clear? Do you guys see why sentence 2 is the actual main conclusion here? And what for me is really a pretty good clue. When I see that must have, right? If must have wasn't given, would the first line would have been the conclusion? Actually, if I remove that must have, right, the company implemented significant cost cutting measures, the company's profits have risen. It's just two factual statements. At that point, I don't even know if it's an argument anymore. It's just the author has told me that the profit has increased, sales is reduced, sales has stayed the same, and cost cutting has been done, right? So this must have is the actual piece of information that gives you a clue that, hey, this is something of a claim. You see, the author is kind of hypothesizing what must have happened. This is what must have happened. It's not necessary that this happened, right? The author is saying this must have happened. So I want you guys to start paying attention to these small details, right? So yeah, good to see that, Rishika. What worked for me is imagine. You have to imagine what the author is trying to convey. I'm a big fan of that. You should be doing that. That's when, and you should read that with emotion, right? This is what they must have done. If you just read it like some bland English, you're not going to figure it out. Really put yourself in those shoes and imagine that conversation happening, right? So yeah, if you look at the timeline of the question, one can argue that it's the second sentence is a claim. First sentence is the conclusion. I would not be able. I don't agree with that one, and I'm not sure how you're making that idea. Perhaps you can, explain that a little bit. But profits have risen. That's a given fact. But the profits have risen is a given fact. It's a fact that the profits have increased. There's no denying that. On the other hand, here there is an element of hypothesis. Hey, this is what must have happened. I hope you see that, right? So this is our segue into how to identify the main conclusion. End of the day, there are only a few things that you can do. What are those few things that you can do, right? Often there are words that will give you some indication that you're dealing with a conclusion. Here, a word like must have is an indicator that we are dealing with a claim. And once you piece in the logic of the first sentence connecting with the second sentence, yeah, it seems like a conclusion, right? So there are these conclusion indicating words. Similarly, sometimes you will see a premise indicating a word, right? For instance, often you'll see this word because, right? We saw this, something is happening because of this. When you see the word because, that's usually the reasoning for something. It can almost never be the main conclusion. So you have words like this which indicate premises also. So I see Praveen has mentioned that. Yeah, you can use since, therefore. Those words are there for a reason. They are there to show you and to give you hints. These are clues that you should pick up, right? You should not rely only on that. And that's where all the problems arise if you rely only on these words. But you should have an eye for these words, right? So there are always, I mean, there are sometimes these words that indicate conclusions, there are sometimes these words that indicate premises. For example, a word like therefore is a textbook conclusion indicator. Therefore, thus, hence, so, those words, typically are almost always associated with conclusions. There are also words that can give you clue about the general structure of the argument. And once you're able to understand the structure, you can figure out the reasoning. What is kind of being told based on what. Even a word like and, all of us have done this cork example, right? This plastic stopper example. Observe how the sentences are structured. Observe this and. So there is one point one. That point one is that bottle master's plastic stopper is kind of available at a price that is only slightly higher. That's one point. And along with that, there's this other point about cork prices going to increase, about to increase sharply in the future. Both of this combined is being considered, and then you add a therefore, you see a conclusion. So when you see a word like and, also your brain starts structuring, creating a list in the brain, right? These are kind of things you should be doing. Not just in boldface, CR in general rewards a certain level of attention to detail. As you start reading more carefully, I expect that you'll pick up on these things. Now, these words are all fine, but sometimes you can't rely on just words, because sometimes intentionally you'll have this word and it's not a conclusion. You'll have that word and it may not be a premise. Be very careful. End of the day, where irrespective of the fact that you're dealing with a boldface question, which is predominantly a test of structure, you have to read the subject matter. You have to understand all the ideas being communicated about cork stoppers and plastic stoppers as far as this argument is concerned. You can't just read this and say, okay, some premises there, some premises there, some premises there, some conclusion is being made. You still have to understand the subject matter. Only then can you do logical reasoning. Only then can you figure out why is it that this last statement is a conclusion. It flows when you understand the content here, right? So sometimes you can't rely on any of these words. You will have to absolutely do logical reasoning. And of course, we're going to do quite a few exercises just to drive this point home. End of the day, when you think about conclusion, always ask, what's that final point? What's that final thing the author is trying to sell me? What is that final thing the author wants to convince me of? What is that final thing the author wants me to take away from my having read this argument? When you think about that, often you'll immediately spot the conclusion. Once you have enough practice, some of you have already have a good amount of practice, so you guys are picking apart the conclusion. You're getting this instantly. For some of us who are struggling with this, keep at it. A little bit of practice, untimed practice, where you're focusing on identifying the conclusion, you're reviewing when you're going wrong. You will start developing an intuitive feel for this, right? And I mean that. So, So I hope the ideas on how to ID the conclusion in general are clear. So let me give you a slightly more complex exercise. Let's try. Maybe some of you find this very easy. That's perfect. Awesome. I see there are candidates for 2, candidate for 3. All right. More 3s coming in. Oh, Rishika, you're spot on when you put in because, I mean, and therefore, yeah, sometimes when you put in that word, it kind of makes sense, right? The story makes sense. I also do that sometimes. Perfectly fair. So, a few, somewhat of an equal split between 2 and 3. So, what's happening here? I'm happy to see nobody chose 1. So, why is statement 1 not the main conclusion? Manan has changed you've changed your answer. Okay. Jaival I asked why to see if it's a conclusion. Oh, that's fantastic, Jaival. I'm very happy to see that. And you'll see why. I actually have that somewhere here. You should ask why. It's one of my techniques as well. It's one of the things I use as well when I'm stuck. So, anyway, the answer is 2, not 3, and definitely not 1. So, again, you have to guard against making silly mistakes. Now, just because you have this word concludes, that doesn't mean statement 1 is the conclusion. It is, you're right, it is the introductory premise. Why is it not the conclusion of the argument? It may be a conclusion, but it's not the author's conclusion. As far as critical reasoning is concerned, the author is the entity. We are looking for what is that the author is concluding. This is a fact presented by the author. The author is telling you that, boss, there is this report, that report has concluded something, right? That's a fact. What is that something? You have to pay attention to the subject matter also. So there is this report which concludes that admin docs, and I'm using very short language here for simplicity, but essentially doctors in administrative roles, they don't contribute as much to patient recovery as full-time clinicians. So imagine, doctors who are stuck in admin work versus full-time clinicians who are always there on hand doing medical work, right? So admin docs are not contributing as much to patient recovery. You also see a slight indication that 2 might be a claim, right? It's the author, we don't know for sure if the difference is because of this, but even the author is acknowledging that it is likely that the difference between admin docs and clinicians, admin docs, DOCS, okay, doctors and clinicians, it stems from, or it arises from, institutional priorities for the admin docs. And you can think about what that means, right? Institutional priorities. Okay, the hospital demands that I need to do so and so duties. I have some priorities. Being part of this hospital institute. Yeah. So, but notice what the author is telling us. The author is kind of making a claim here. The claim is that, hey, there is this difference that has been talked about in the first sentence. As far as contributing to patient recovery is concerned, these admin doctors are not doing as well, man. They're not doing as much as these full-time clinicians, right? In the second sentence, the author is making a claim about it. The author claims that, hey, this is actually because of the institutional priorities. And that third sentence, which some of you thought is the conclusion, some of you, not all, it's actually a justification, right? It kind of explains why the culprit is institutional priorities. Because if you talk about, we are dealing with hospitals, so when you say hospital priority, that's the institutional priority. So as per the hospital or institutional priorities, the admin doctor's role is kind of designed to focus on policy and compliance and all those things rather than actual medical stuff. So because they're buried in policy compliance rather than medical decision making, maybe that's why they're not able to give enough time to patient recovery. Something is happening. You can see that it kind of explains, it's kind of provides support to this idea that institutional priority is the culprit. So for those of you who did not choose 2 as the main conclusion, I hope it is clear. Some of the key ideas here is, just because you see what looks like a keyword, don't jump to conclusions. You have to employ reasoning to figure out why 2 and why not 3, right? Manan, I was very happy to see you change your answer to the correct one. So you realized something. That's pure gold. Good. One is factual. You're right. So everybody clear on this? Can I move on? Just quick show of hands, just to ensure that you guys are here, you guys are awake, right? So think about everything we had to do with exercises like this. I'll give you one more exercise. This, of course, is a very classic OG boldface question. Some of you have definitely solved it. Just let me know what is the main conclusion. That's all the exercise is. Another aspect of boldface, as you guys know, or as you guys are realizing now, some of those arguments are long. So boldface is one of those places where you need to get used to the length, which actually should not be as big a deal as you think, because we are doing RC anyway. There's a lot of RC. We're dealing with a lot more text anyway. So might as well see a bit of it in CR. Now we're seeing some answers come in. Okay. So let's look at all the candidates. Some of us say it is virtually certain, and some more of us are saying, are more cautious. Okay. A more cautious. Great. So a more cautious is actually the correct main conclusion. Um, but I mean, not this one, obviously. This is the main conclusion. But let's understand why. What's happening in this? So for any of us who chose, it is virtually certain that the traditional view is false. Let me just ask you one thing. Whose conclusion is that? You have to observe the nitty-gritty details of how sentences are written, right? So think about this. Firstly, you're when you're talking about main conclusion, you're concerned with finding the author's conclusion here, right? Did you observe that this idea that it is virtually certain that the traditional view is false, it's not even the author's argument, it's actually the scholar's conclusion. For that, you have to observe how the sentence is structured. Look at this. Several scholars have argued that, so the scholars are kind of arguing that since reason 1, Newton's book includes a presentation of calculus, and since reason 2, so there's a reason 1 and reason 2, these are the premises of the scholar's argument, right? So because of reason 1 and reason 2, the scholars conclude that it is virtually certain that the traditional view is false. Then the author comes in and says, boss, don't make such incautious conclusions, you need to be a little more careful. A more cautious conclusion than this is called for, however. Yeah. So this is not the case. This is not the scenario where you have to necessarily use the white test, Jaiwal. But great, if it's working for you, it's working for you. But just by observing the nitty-gritty details, the important nitty-gritty details correctly. So observe my obsession with noticing these structural words, which kind of gives me a certain structure of what's happening. Overall, what's happening in this argument? Let's quickly run through. Historian is the author for all practical purposes. This is the guy who's written this argument. So Newton has come up with calculus I'm just abstracting it. Newton has come up with calculus. Leibniz has also come up with calculus. There is this traditional belief out there that both of them arrived at calculus independently. But recently there's a discovery. What is that exactly? There is a note of Leibniz. This note kind of refers to some book written by Newton. And lo and behold, that book actually contains calculus. What is the implication being thrown here? They are kind of trying to tell you that Leibniz was perhaps inspired by Newton, right? Then book includes, so notes were written before, these notes were written before Leibniz himself came up with calculus. All of that is painting the picture that perhaps Leibniz was inspired by Newton, which is why the scholar is challenging the traditional belief. The scholar is telling you maybe that traditional belief is false. Perhaps Leibniz was inspired by Newton. Inspired is my politically correct way of saying that, right? But then the author comes in, makes this conclusion that you need to be a bit more cautious, and the author kind of justifies that. So I hope you guys see the structure here. With that, let's go into what happens when there are two legit conclusion candidates. Here, I wouldn't say that because one is a scholar's conclusion, and anyway, it's going in the opposite direction. The author is kind of criticizing the scholar's conclusion. Whereas, what happens when you have two conclusions both in the same direction? One is clearly supporting the other, but your job is to find out what is supporting what. This is where, and I don't care what you call it, why test, because test, therefore test, feel free to use whatever you like. But essentially, you are trying to reason out which substatement supports which statement, right? So let's think about it. I'm going to take the example that we already used. This is the same example that I used to talk to you about intermediate conclusion. So we actually know that this is the intermediate conclusion here, but let's kind of apply this test and figure out why that is. All you need to do is take out your two conclusion candidates. So one is this idea that the restaurant must be busy tonight. Second is this idea that, yeah, we should make a reservation before we go to the restaurant, right? And you don't need to use the exact words. The core idea is what matters, right? Now you have to see what statement is supporting what. One way to do that is what I've written. What I've written is a therefore version of this test. Which sequence makes sense? The restaurant is going to be busy tonight. Therefore, yes, boss, we should reserve beforehand. It's going to be busy, so let's reserve beforehand. The sequence makes sense. Just try the other sequence and see if it makes sense, yes or no. Look at this. We should reserve we should make a reservation for this restaurant beforehand. Therefore, the restaurant is going to be busy tonight. Does this make logical sense? You tell me. Which is why, what is a statement that is supporting the other statement? The idea that the restaurant is going to be busy tonight kind of supports or helps build the case for the final idea that yes, we should make a reservation beforehand. Therefore, one is my intermediate conclusion, two is my main conclusion. Is this idea coming through? Juan, that nope is for idea not coming through, or is it something else? Just have to check. The other way to think about this is why and because, right? You could also ask the question. So, idea one: the restaurant must be busy tonight. Why? Because we should make a reservation before we go. That doesn't make sense, right? The restaurant must be busy tonight. Why? Because we should make a reservation. That doesn't make sense. The flip side makes sense. We should make a reservation for this restaurant before we go. Why is that? Because it's going to be busy tonight. That makes sense. So I hope the essence of this test is clear. You could use therefore, why, because, that doesn't matter. End of the day, what you're actually doing is figuring out which statement logically supports which statement. You're considering both the possibilities and you're figuring out what is logical, what is nonsensical. That's how you figure it out. Does this make sense? This is the last of the theory. After this, I'm going to throw you into the deep end. We're going to solve what at least I believe some of them are nasty, some tough questions. So, hey, thanks for that feedback, yeah? Kiki. CR, I mean, verbal is a lot of fun. Of course, all of GMAT is fun, but if I say that, not everybody, echoes the same sentiment. But yeah, CR is definitely fun. So, can we move? Quick takeaways. Firstly, the conclusion need not be the last sentence. It could be the first argument, it could be somewhere in the middle, God knows. It could be anywhere in the argument. I should use the word argument here. Yeah. Um, don't rely only on indicators. These indicator words are good. We also use them. I see the word therefore, mind does something, we know some stuff. But don't rely only on that. In the tough cases, you will have to do some level of logical reasoning. It is a logic based test. It's not just you looking at some terms and making quick judgments, right? But yeah, there are these words that can give you some clues. There's some logical reasoning you can do. One specific type of logical reasoning we just discussed, therefore or why or because. Great. So does this test work even in the toughest of questions? Coming right up. It works, but you have to be very careful with the logic, right? So let's get into my process for solving boldface questions. Uh, it's a little counterintuitive to the point that all this while I've been giving you a lot of this jargon terms. What is a fact? What is a claim? What are these terms? What do these terms mean? But when I'm solving, I don't obsess too much about it. I leave it to the answer choices to a certain level. So let's discuss how I solve boldface, and I'm sure that at least some of you will get some benefit from this. So it's a simple 4-step process. um, I see absolutely no point in reading the choices first or anything like that. Read the argument. Now, one of the decision points that you would have eventually is, as I read, should I be also categorizing everything into fact, premise, conclusion? Great question. I don't obsess about that at all. Because if your brain is too focused on doing this categorization, then that is taking away from the brain power needed to understand the argument itself. And even though it is a structure based question type, in a lot of cases you will have to understand the depth of the subject matter the way you would understand it for an assumption or a weekend question, right? So if your brain is overly involved in categorizing everything you read into buckets, that's not an efficient way to solve questions. That's what I've realized. So invariably, as you read, especially as you get really used to solving boldface questions, as you read, your brain intuitively, without wasting any time, naturally, pretty much unconsciously categorizes. That's perfectly fine, and that happens. For those, some of you might already be there, but that happens to a certain level once you have reached a certain level. But typically, otherwise, don't bother. Read the argument normally, the way you would read an assumption or a weekend question, right? Don't, just because those two statements are in bold doesn't mean you have to hyper focus, over obsess over those. Read the damn thing normally. Right? We have time to figure out those things later. First, read the argument. That's step one. Step two, we've kind of realized that pretty much most of these questions, eventually your main conclusion is important. So your step two is identify the main conclusion, if it exists. There are a couple of cases where it doesn't exist, in which case you just directly go and try and find out what everything is. But yeah, pretty much 95-96% of cases, there is a main conclusion. Go and find it, because once you've understood it, that's like the most important piece of your argument. Everything else is centered around the main conclusion. So figure out the main conclusion, then you can do some analysis. This is boldface is definitely one of those question types where it pays rich dividends to do some analysis before you go to choices, and I can show you that, right? So spend a little bit of time before you start looking at the choices. What should you do? Again, what exactly is the main conclusion? Got it. Look at boldface 1, look at boldface 2. How, what exactly are boldface 1 and boldface 2 doing in this argument? So what exactly is it? Okay, it might be some evidence which is supporting the main conclusion. Great, let's catch that. Similarly, there might be some relationship between boldface 1 and boldface 2. Boldface 1 might be introducing a particular plan, and boldface 2 might be telling us why the plan won't work. Whatever it is, in a very rough way, just figure out what boldface 2 and boldface 2 are doing in this argument, especially with regard to the main conclusion and where necessary, where relevant, the connection between the two boldface statements. And I want to show you this does not have to be some very hyper focused analysis. It can be pretty rough. In fact, what I've written here is this idea that rough is enough. If you start overdoing analysis here, you're wasting time. There'll be some cases where it's not even easy to figure out if it's a fact or a claim. If you over obsess over it, you're wasting time. For all you know, the answer choice is not even testing you on that, right? And that's just an example. So a very rough, quick understanding that you're trying to build of what these two things are doing in the argument, that's it. And then go to choice analysis. Also, choice analysis in boldface is slightly different from what you would do for your assumption, strength, and weaken. This is where there's a clear differentiation. Here, what you need to do is a piece by piece analysis. The thing is, each and every answer choice has these pieces, right? The first boldface is a claim. If that first boldface is not a claim and you're very sure it's not a claim, you could reject the choice right there. In the exam scenario, therefore, in a lot of cases, you can fly through boldface answer choices because you'll find a very quick, easy way to clearly reject a choice. You don't have this is that one question type where you don't necessarily have to read every choice entirely. I find one reason to reject, I am done. One legit reason to reject, I'm done. As far as that choice is concerned on the exam. That is on the exam. While practicing, in the interest of muscle building, both in terms of how to solve boldface questions and general process of elimination, in the interest of these things, when you're practicing, don't do that. Practice everything. Answer each and every node of each and every answer choice, evaluate, analyze that. In the exam, quick decisions can be made here, right? Also, all structure based questions, including boldface, your process of elimination becomes a little extra important. This is the same thing that you will see with main point, I mean, your primary purpose question in RC. That's also structure based question. Really, POE, process of elimination, is important. If you're not clearly able to reject something, keep it on hold. Let's work with the other choices and come back to that. That's very important here. Uh, if you don't see a reason to reject, don't reject. That's very important. Yeah. And in general, boldface requires a bit of an open mind. Uh, things may not be written in a way that you like, but everything else is wrong. That one thing is right. Just move. Be flexible. Okay. So that's just a little bit of the process that I follow. End of the day, read the argument normally, identify the main conclusion, quickly, roughly do some analysis. What are these boldface 1, boldface 2? What are they doing? How do they connect with the main conclusion? How do they connect with each other? Then go choice by choice, piece by piece. Where necessary, keep it on hold, move to the next. I hope the general process principles are clear, right? So let's solve our first, it's actually our second full length question of the day. But from here on, I do expect a slightly higher difficulty. Let's see. You guys have done well so far. Let's see how it goes. All right, this is awesome. I'm happy to see so many beasts. Uh, in terms of level, this does walk into the 655 to 705 level. So this is the early 700s. So moderately hard. Some of you, I mean, I like calling it medium hard. Some of you would call it moderately hard, early hard. So I'm happy to see that nobody struggled. Did anyone apply that test that we talked about? Because you do have to, there is an intermediate conclusion here, as you can see. Did anybody apply, the therefore test, by test, or was it clear without having to do that? All right. So wow, this is fantastic. So many bees. I'm so happy. Awesome. So, passage, I don't think, I mean, the argument itself is not difficult. But again, what you'll see me do here, and I'm using very rough notes, it's rough notes, crude language. But what I've shown here is that I'm focusing on the subject matter also, because your first step for me, at least for me, is to read it normally. And as you read, you figure out, once you read, you can still figure out all of that is okay. So, what's happening here? Firstly, there's a situation, there has been a recent rise in the inventory level, right, of button tools products, right? Now, typically, whenever you think, and again, think real life, whenever you think that inventory is increasing, there's a red flag there, inventory holding cost and all that. But yeah, so inventory is increasing despite that the production has not slowed down. That usually is a big red flag, right? You're producing so much, you're storing so much in your warehouses, but you should be slowing down typically because you're producing so much at this point that inventory is increasing, right? But inventory, the production has not been slowed down. That's what is given to us. Now, a prominent investor who is invested in this company, this guy is absolutely going into criticism mode. He is kind of making this claim that yes, the company is mismanaged because of this aspect. We are seeing a rise in inventory, but despite that, you guys have not slowed down production. That's bad. You're mismanaging it. But that's not the main conclusion, right? Eventually it's coming to this. It's doubtful whether investors sniping at management can ever be anything than counterproductive. In other words, it's never productive. It's not a good thing at all. But in this case, it is clearly not justified. So here the author is clearly taking a stand. I'm happy to see that all of you are able to crack this idea that this is the main conclusion here. Right? In this case, the investor's criticism is not justified. The rest is the author supporting that idea. It is true that typically, often, when the inventory is increasing, it indicates that your production is outstripping demand. No, think logically, think real life. If your production is outstripping demand, you should be slowing down production. That would have made sense. But that's not what's happening here. The author says in the case of Burton, that's not what's happening. Your increasing inventory is not because of production outstripping demand, it's because of something else. Right? So that's all there is to it. I think you guys realize that this is the intermediate conclusion and this is the main conclusion. In case it was doubtful, I can see that none of you had to apply this test here. But what I've shown here is that you can apply that test here if necessary. Because when I've discussed this with some others, they have found difficulty to figure out which one. That's why I kind of specifically put this in. End of the day, the investors sniping at Burton's management for not slowing down production in response to increased inventory is not justified. Therefore, the increased inventory does not indicate that production is outstripping demand. That doesn't make sense. The other sequence makes sense, where this is the intermediate and this is the main. How is that? In Burton's case, the increased inventory, and because you asked, right, in a slightly tougher case, does this test work? It works. Here's an example. In Burton's case, the increased inventory, it does not indicate that production is outstripping demand. Think about the logical nuance there. So, if the production is not really outstripping demand, why do you need to slow down production? And if you don't need to slow down production, then the investor really has no basis to go and criticize the management. Slowing production is not needed at all. So this criticism, the sniping that he's doing is not justified. So you can see how 2 is eventually helping build the case for 1. Now, this is if you had to do that test. I'm happy to see that none of you needed it. So very quick, before you go to the choices, once you've read the argument, you've understood it, read it like a normal person, understood it, somewhat categorized it quickly, You identify that main conclusion is actually boldface 1, boldface 2 is an intermediate conclusion, supports the main conclusion. Choice B. I doubt, because none of you gave me any other choice, I'm not going to discuss any of the other choices. Let's move to the next question. Let's hope you guys have fun with this one too. That's the first answer in. All right. This one, I think you guys are taking a bit more time. So that's perfectly normal. Wow, D seems to be the overwhelmingly popular choice here. But I'll wait for a few more seconds. All right. Wow, everybody likes D so much, yeah? Juan coming in with A. All right. All right, another 30 seconds, let's say. Rishika, you're switching to A. That's interesting. So B1 being IC still inconclusive. POE led to D. All right. Hmm. All right, guys. Let's discuss. It looks like we are done because of the first example we did today. Oh, yes. I'm happy to see some of that here and there. So let's kind of hold this. Let's kind of run through. Ankit, you're also a candidate for D. Okay. Jack is also changing your answer. You're also changing your answer. Okay. Some people have changed to A. All right. So it's kind of between D and A, is it not? Yeah. So this question definitely is on the difficult side. It does fall into that 705 to 805 bucket, which I know a lot of you are fond of, right? So what's happening here? End of the day, and again, my notes here are very crude. They're just meant for quick consumption. What's happening here? In countries where automobile insurance includes compensation for whiplash injuries, the reports are 2x as much compared to countries where whiplash is not covered, right? I just put some example numbers here just to for us to understand things. So countries where whiplash insurance is covered, whiplash injuries are covered. Countries where whiplash injuries are not covered, 2x more. So people tend to report whiplash 2x more in those countries where whiplash is covered. That's the first statement, right? That's essentially a fact that's given to you. It's what I would call a factual observation, data point. I think everybody agrees with me on this. Now, some commentators have argued, right? So we're dealing with what the argument that's being made by the commentators. And I want you to notice this word also. Some commentators have argued correctly. In other words, the author agrees with this argument. Some commentators have argued correctly that since there is presently no objective test for whiplash, or in other words, there's no way to figure out if somebody actually had whiplash, right? Because of that, spurious reports cannot be identified. If somebody is doing fraud, you cannot figure it out. These commentators are, however, wrong to draw the further conclusion. So here is where something very interesting happened. The main conclusion, which is coming from the author, is this overall statement. These commentators are wrong to draw the further conclusion. That's something. But nested within the author's conclusion is the commentator's conclusion. Do you guys see that? For those of you who did not see it before, do you guys see that the commentator's conclusion is kind of mentioned here? It's kind of nested within the author's conclusion. So the commentator is actually going on to draw the further conclusion based on the data point that is boldface 1. That conclusion is that in countries where whiplash is covered, half of the cases are spurious. So we were talking about 100 versus 50. What is the commentator's point? The commentator's point is that half of this 100, that is 50 of them, are spurious. They're fraud cases. So that's why you see this discrepancy. Otherwise, you would just see 50-50, equal. This is what the commentator would like you to believe. It is their conclusion. The author's conclusion is that the commentators are wrong to make this conclusion. So these commentators are, however, wrong to make this conclusion. And how does the author justify his or her conclusion? Clearly, in countries where whiplash is not provided, coverage is not provided, there's no incentive to report. Even if I suffer the injury, I'm not going to report it. So what the author is trying to say is, you're currently seeing a stat which is 150. It's actually not the case that in countries where whiplash is covered, people are over reporting. It's actually the opposite case. In countries where whiplash is not covered, people are under reporting. So if people started reporting, people in these countries who are suffering whiplash injuries started reporting properly, and stopped underreporting, then you would actually achieve parity. Then you would actually see 100. So the difference is because of some other reason. Everybody with me on this? It's a slightly complex argument, I think. And the choices also have a certain complexity aspect to it. But very quick show of hands, is the argument, is every aspect clear to you? Especially, I want you to notice how the commentator's conclusion was kind of sneakily kept within the author's conclusion. The commentator makes this conclusion that in those countries where whiplash is covered, half of those cases are spurious. The author comes in and says that above conclusion is incorrect. Everyone with me? Quick show of hands, just so that I can confidently move on, knowing that we're all clear on this. Great. Thanks, John, for replying. So now that the argument is clear, including to some level the logic of it, let's quickly do that analysis step. So what is the main conclusion? The main conclusion is the statement. These commentators are wrong to draw that particular conclusion that in those countries with whiplash. So the main conclusion contains your boldface 2. The main conclusion contains that boldface 2. Yeah, I hope that's clear. Now, boldface 2 is the easiest to categorize. Boldface 2 is essentially the commentator's conclusion. Main conclusion is telling you that commentator's conclusion is wrong. Boldface 2 is the commentator's conclusion, which the author kind of tells you it's wrong. And boldface 1, if you really notice and observe the structure, it's used to support the main the commentator's conclusion. This point, since there is no objective test for whiplash, spurious reports cannot be identified. This is eventually used by the commentators to draw the further conclusion. All the clues are there in the language. You just have to pay attention, right? So boldface 1 is premise evidence which is supporting the commentator's conclusion. Boldface 2 is the commentator's conclusion. The main conclusion says that that commentator's conclusion is not right. All of that are the general ideas before we go to choices. And Juan, Rishika, eventually you guys were right. So all of you who changed your answers, you guys saw something here in the choices as well. There's another subtlety that's there in choice A, which I want to discuss. It's a very common trap in boldface. So let's discuss choice A, which is the right answer. The first is evidence that has been used to support a conclusion that the argument criticizes. Go step by step, piece by piece. Is the first considered to be evidence? Can you consider it to be evidence? Yeah, you can consider it evidence to support the commentator's conclusion. That's okay. Has it been used to support any conclusion? Yes. Is it a conclusion that the argument criticizes? Yes. The main conclusion is a criticism of the commentator's conclusion. So all of this is legit, no problem. Let's look at the second part. The second is that conclusion. Notice the word that. It's not talking about the conclusion. It's that conclusion. So when you see a word like that, you have to ask the question, what does this refer to? And the answer to that is obviously lying elsewhere in boldface 1. If the word that is being used, it's clearly referencing something that was already brought out, something that was already brought in, right? So when you say that conclusion, what is that conclusion referring to? A conclusion that the argument criticizes. So is boldface 1 supporting a conclusion that the argument criticizes? Yes, boldface 1 is supporting the commentator's conclusion, which the argument is criticizing. When you say argument is criticizing, that's the main conclusion is criticizing, right? Can a third party conclusion also be considered under a conclusion? Excellent question. The answer is yes. A conclusion refers to any damn conclusion that is possible. It could be third party also. Excellent question. So is everybody clear on why A is right? I hope that is clear. That conclusion tricks me. I know. That's why I put in this question. It is a very common trap. That's why I thought let's discuss this one. But good. I'm happy that you got something here, which is pretty useful. So yeah, A is right. Congrats to those who were able to figure it out. Some of you figured it out instantly. Some of you came around to it. So which means your brain is able to do the reasoning necessary. It just requires a bit more fine-tuned practice, right? So I'm going to discuss the other choice that's very popular in the interest of time. But you guys can tell me if there's any choice that you want me to discuss. I'll make sure we discuss that. But yeah, we could quickly run through it. Boldface doesn't take time. The first is evidence that is being used to support a conclusion that the argument criticizes. This is exactly the same from statement one, from choice A. This is okay. The second is a position that the argument defends. This is wrong. It's the position that the argument criticizes. So B can be rejected. The first is a claim. In fact, it's not even a claim, right? The author is kind of giving this as a fact. So you could argue that this is not a claim. The first is a claim that is being used to support in a conclusion that the argument accepts. Big red flag here. It's used to support a conclusion which is criticized. So I'm showing you all these reasons why you could easily reject some of these choices. Second is the position that the argument defends. Again, no. It's the position that the argument criticizes, right? So you have enough reasons to reject these things. Second is an intermediate conclusion. That's definitely not true. It's being used to support a conclusion that the argument defends. It's not true. Second is a position that the argument opposes. Yeah, that is okay. We could live with that. The first presents a claim that is disputed in the argument. Is it disputed though? Notice even the author is very clear to say this is correct, boss. It's not even disputed. So just showing you how answer choice analysis also works through this example. SC paying off after 1.5 years, of course. So that can happen. Right. So a couple of quick takeaways. In the previous question, if necessary, you could have used these tests to figure out the correct main conclusion if it was necessary. We saw one particular edge case here where one conclusion is nested within the other. You do have these kinds of tricks that sometimes you might see in the exam. Always just think logically, work through it then and there. Don't freak out when you see a very different scenario. Yeah. Commentator's conclusion was nested. Now, this is something I hope some of us have learned. Whenever you see that word, especially in boldface 2, the second part of your statement, let your radar really, awaken. You have to ask the question, what is that referring to? If you have the principle, if you have the, wisdom to ask this question, always, you won't fall for any of those silly mistakes here. Okay. So, ready for the next one? I hope. Let's take it up a notch or maybe at the same level depending on this one clearly was difficult for the group in general. Let's solve another question and let's see what kind of learnings we can extract from it. Here you go. Fairly long, huh? Yeah. Let's have fun. Yeah, good to see answers coming in. Take some more time. What is R? Ah, okay, okay, okay. This looks like a fairly even split between C, D, and E. Okay. Let's take, let's say, 30 more seconds and then let's discuss. All right. So let's discuss, guys. Let me know. Did you find this difficult as a question? At least the stats kind of suggest so, right? Because both C, D, and E are all somewhat popular. A little more for C, it looks like. Yeah. So again, because you guys were so good with solving the easy questions, I told you towards the end I'm going to bring in some tough ones. So these are the tough ones. So clearly these are tough, man. So this is John. To answer your questions, it's if it's either 705 to 805 or 805 plus. I don't recall exactly, so you can check the stats on that one. But it's definitely 705 plus as difficulty goes. And the reason I've put this question particularly, actually, with all the questions that we're doing, there's some specific ideas that I'm trying to bring to you, right? For instance, watch out for that is a principle. This is a good example of a question where you absolutely must understand the logic. You can't just go around structurally looking at things. Yeah, this is a conclusion, that's a premise. I don't think you'll be able to get this right unless you really focus on the logic. And I believe that's kind of where the complexity that you're seeing comes in. And that's my point. Don't just boldface is a structure oriented question type, but there has to be a layer of logic before you look at structure. So have you really understood the logic here? That's what I really want to understand. And perhaps I'm wrong, but as we discuss the logic, you guys let me know if you had the clarity. You had very good clarity on what the argument is really telling you, right? So let's discuss what's happening. And again, let's just focus on understanding what the argument is telling us, free from everything else. So, firstly, scientists typically do their most creative work before the age of 40. So, the author is presenting what happens to be a factual scenario. This is what it is. It so turns out that scientists typically do their most creative work before they hit 40, before the age of 40. Now, with the next sentence, the author is introducing a somewhat common thought, a common belief that exists. So it is commonly thought that this happens. The reason scientists do their most creative work before the age of 40, this happens because aging by itself brings about a loss of creative capacity. And you can imagine this, right? As people grow old, your brain is not working as wonderfully anymore. Definitely true for me. You know, you guys didn't see me when I was in college. right? So, and I'm sure it's true for a lot of you working professionals. You guys know what I'm talking about. So there's this common belief that, why is it that scientists don't do their most creative work beyond 40? It seems to be the common belief is that it's because of age. As you age, you lose some creative capacity. That's why it so happens. Notice what's happening. However, studies show, and you see the word however, you know that the direction is changing. At this point, as of this point, the direction will change. So the author is going to go against this idea, against this common belief. However, studies show that of scientists who produce highly creative work beyond the age of 40, a disproportionately large number enter their field at a later age than is usual. You have to pause here and understand what the sentence is trying to tell you. So, of those scientists who somehow continue to produce highly creative work beyond the age of 40, firstly, most scientists don't do much creative work beyond 40. That's kind of the established idea here. Scientists do their most creative work well before 40. That's the idea. But among those scientists who are able to keep producing that fantastic work even beyond the age of 40, it so turns out that a disproportionately large number of them, let's say 80%, if there are 1,000 such scientists, 800, 900 of them, they entered the field at a much later age. So imagine the scenario where somebody becomes a scientist at, say, 20, just to understand what's happening here, right? Somebody becomes a scientist at 20 now versus somebody becomes a scientist at 30, right? That's just us understanding things. What we're being told is, among those, let's say, 100 scientists who continue to produce great work even beyond the age of 40, if you look at those 100 people, most of them, a disproportionately high number of them, entered the field very late. If you really think about it, this introduces a certain logical idea. Maybe it is not the age that is the problem. Maybe it is the fact that these people, those people who typically enter into these fields, enter way too early. Maybe it's about the number of years of work they have done in the field. Maybe for the person who's entering at 20, by the time they hit 40, they have worked for 20 years in that field. Their brain is saturated, no more creative ideas. Whereas for a person who just joined the field at 30, only 10 years in the field, that person is still able to produce great output even after 40, even after turning 40. In other words, now you see what that however is doing. The author is trying to tell you that maybe this common belief is wrong. It's not aging per se which is the issue. The actual issue is these guys have spent too long in the field. Right? Is this idea coming through? And in my brain, as I was trying to understand this, I took quick numbers like what I've shown you here. That was me trying to understand the logic here, even though this is a boldface question. Right? Joan is clear. Anyone else? Rest of you? The logic felt complex. Yeah, the logic is complex, but I'm happy you guys are seeing it. If you guys are seeing it, that's fantastic. So just to recap, because I think I did deep dive into this a little bit. So there's the factual observation is scientists do most of their creative work before they turn 40. There's a common belief regarding why this happens. That common belief is blame it on aging. These guys are old. There's a lot with age comes a loss of creative capacity. That's why you see that. However, the author has a different idea, right? The author is trying to say, see, studies of people who continue to produce fantastic stuff even beyond 40. If you look at them, most of them joined the field late. So think about it. If it really is about me turning 40, or if it's really about scientists turning 40, then why is there a difference between this group and this group? Point is, both people in this group are also 40 years old, people in this group are also 40 years old, right? So why is it that one group of people who joined late, are still very creative, whereas people who joined early in their fields, once they touch 40, they are not able to be creative? Both of them are 40-year-olds. The fact that there's this discrepancy brings in this implied idea that perhaps it's not age, perhaps it's the length, the length of years, the number of years they worked in the field. That's the problem, and that's what we see here. Now the author kind of takes that point and hammers it home. Since by the age of 40, the large majority of scientists have been working in their field for at least 15 years. So they essentially started very early. The study's findings strongly suggests that the real reason why scientists over 40 rarely produce highly creative work is not the age factor, but it's the fact that they've spent way too long in their field. They didn't join at 35, they joined as 20-year-olds and they've been doing this for too long. So, if there is a conclusion here, what is that conclusion? What is the final point the author wants you to take away having read this? It's that, boss, this is the real explanation. So, for me, for all practical purposes, the main conclusion is that last statement. What is the real reason why scientists over 40 rarely produce creative work? It's actually because it has nothing to do with age. It's just that they spend too many years in the field. That's it. Everything else is actually supporting this. Now, if you really understand what's happening here, boldface 2 is your main conclusion for all practical purposes. It's the actual explanation that the argument and therefore the author favors, which is why your choice C, by the way, is right. Boldface 1, if you realize, this is actually data that the author used to help and build the case for his or her theory. So a lot of you chose choice C. Is boldface 1 used to support an explanation that the argument challenges, or is it used to support actually the main point of the argument? If the flow of information, if the logic of the argument is clear, you would not have gone wrong in this. That's my sense. Do you guys agree with me? Those of you who chose choice C and choice D, I can reject both choice C and D on this one point. Is the first a piece of evidence? Yeah, it is in fact a factual piece of evidence. That's okay. I don't mind that. That's not a problem. Has it been used to support an explanation? Yeah, it is eventually building the case for your actual explanation. But is it an explanation that the argument challenges? This is where both C and D fall flat. Right? I hope you guys see here. The key learning here is, with the tougher boldface questions, and this does qualify as a tough one. Even our stats in the session, and if you go check it out on GMAT Club, you'll realize what I'm talking about. The tougher questions, you can't always just rely on just casually observing the structure. You have to get into the logic of it, and that requires effort. So you also have to see the kind of things I did here. Sometimes you could just take numbers to understand what's happening. You different ways of visualizing data, understanding the core ideas, but you got to put in that effort. When the questions get tough, you got to do this. That's the idea. But once you do this, once you've understood, boldface 2 is the main conclusion. Boldface 1, it's data. What is the data used for here? It was actually used to support the main conclusion. It's the fact that people beyond 40 who are still productive, most of them are actually late joiners in their field. That's what helped make this hypothesis, make this idea that, it's not about age, it's about spending too long in your field. Boldface 1 is a solid support for your main conclusion, boldface 2. And that means you can reject C and D without even looking at these things. You can reject it in the exam. And that's clarity you get from understanding logic, right? I hope that helped. How are we on time? Do we have time for one more question? I'll do that. We have hit the 2-hour mark. We'll do that only if you guys are, ready for it. Then we can do one more question. I'll leave one for homework. So, thanks, Johan. I'm glad you're getting a lot of this right, Johan. So good. Your prep is working out somewhere clearly. It looks like. Good luck with your next attempts. What about everyone? Do we want to do one more question? How's the energy of this room at this point? So I'll wait for a couple of seconds. Meanwhile, just to summarize and things that we saw here, what all did we do? Somewhat tough question. Focus on understanding the logic best you can. I'm not saying obsess so much over logic that you don't see anything else, but don't treat boldface as an exercise in just looking at structure. I know the YouTube title of this says it's all about structure, but it's not all about structure. It is structure and logic also. To figure out structure, you still need logic. Second, also pay attention to these words, right? The author brought in this common belief. There's this common belief which said it's really about aging. And then when you see, however, even before you read some of this, you can kind of see that if the previous theory is aging, and you see, however, the author in the case that is going to be built henceforth, at least to a certain level, is going to be, hey, it's not aging. So just by looking at those words, you could kind of figure out some of those things. So paying attention to these words matter. uh, Trying to understand the ideas. In this case, I took numbers to understand it. That's one way of doing it, but either way, you have to focus on that. That's the idea. Once you've understood it, the actual solving of it is pretty straightforward. So choice C, the first provides evidence, yeah, to support an explanation. That's also okay. That the argument favors, absolutely. This is the favored explanation here. The second is that explanation. That in this context is this boldface 2. Great. So let's do one more. This you guys can do it as homework. Let's kind of wrap up with this one. Again, has a certain theme that want to I want you to pay attention to. We'll be very happy if a good number of you get this right, but let's see. Yeah, good to see answers come in. Everybody is very confident about E, it looks like. I'm not seeing any other candidates. Okay, we have a D. Okay, let's take a few more seconds and then let's hammer this home and wrap up. All right. So perhaps we can start discussing. So a quick question for those of you who chose choice D. Uh, Rather, those of you who chose choice E, how did you reject D? For those of you who chose choice D, what made you reject choice D? So I can see there are a couple of candidates for D as well. But for those of you who chose choice E, what made you reject choice D? What did you see? There's no inaccuracy being talked about. Okay, that's a good answer, Muskan. Manan says claim isn't used as support to go against. That's why eliminated D. The claim isn't used as support but to go against. Okay, fair enough, fair enough. We'll come to that as well. Good. But yeah, if you go and check the stats on this, it's not really, I think, compared to the last question, I mean, compared to the question that we just did, I don't think it's as difficult a question to solve. But this one, if you go and check the stats, it looks a little more difficult. That's because this choice, one of the choices here is a beautiful trap choice, right? It's yeah, it in terms of processing and what it takes to solve the question, I believe this is an easier question than the previous one we did. But stats wise, this sits at 805 plus for some reason, and that reason is because of the one trap choice. So let's understand first what's happening. And yeah, this is the last question of the day. So, you know, let's have some energy as we are wrapping up. So, firstly, the author introduces some ideas here. So, it's a fact that there's this goal, and the goal is to achieve self sufficiency in electricity production. With this goal, there's a proposal that's being talked about. The proposal is to construct these 11 huge hydroelectric power plants. So, imagine those hydroelectric stuff, water being converted to electricity, you know, turbines running and all that. Um, Although this is a massive project, so this is coming to you from the author. The author tells you, yes, this is a massive project, but you see that although there's a contrast. Although this is a massive project, it is probably not massive enough to achieve the goal. Was everybody able to identify that this statement was the main conclusion, or was there a struggle here? Everybody, with all the conclusion finding exercises, I hope you guys were able to work out that this is the conclusion here. Just checking that, right? uh, I'll move on. Meanwhile, you guys, chime in if you can. Great. Awesome. That's Berus. That's great. So although this is a massive project, the author goes on to claim that it's probably not big enough to achieve the goal. As of the time I was reading this, I didn't know if this is the main conclusion. So at that point, I just called it a claim that the author is making. Later on, as you read this, you realize that it is the main conclusion. So even with these notes that you have seen me scribble here, you know, it's not that as I'm reading, I'm categorizing it as premise, fact, main conclusion. I'm reading it normally, casually. At this point, maximum I figure out is okay, the author is making a claim here that's probably not big enough to achieve the goal. It's as you read the rest of it that you piece together this idea that, hey, this was the main conclusion all along, right? So, in order to achieve self-sufficiency, so with that goal, the proposal is 11 huge hydroelectric power plants. Author tells us this is a massive project, great, but it's probably not big enough to achieve the goal. Okay, why is that? And this is something I really wanted you to pay attention to. And Muskan, I think, did a great job of talking about this. You see what this means? Those of you who chose choice D, where is the inaccuracy? It's not inaccurate. We'll come to that. But this is it. It is true that is something I really want your brain to pick up. So whatever boldface 2 is, the author is telling you that it's true. There's no debate about it. This is a true. The author is nowhere challenging the accuracy of boldface 2. So to say it's inaccurate is fundamentally going against the author here. The author is telling you, boss, whatever this thing is, whatever you call this is boldface 2, it's true. It is true that. So I don't know. It looks like some of you did not pay attention to this. CR does pay rewards if you pay attention to this. You have to read carefully, systematically. Yeah. So it is true that adding the projected output of the new hydroelectric plants to the output that Harshavardhan can achieve now would be enough to meet the forecast demand for electricity. So what is this actually? It's kind of true that there is this projected output that you'll get from the 11 hydroelectric power plants. If you add that to the output that can be achieved right now from the existing power plants, the keyword being now, right? Then you would be able to meet your forecast goals. So you have some forecast goal. Currently, there's a potential to create so much of energy. Along with that, if you add your projected output, you will be able to meet the target. You will be able to meet those forecast goals. If you think about it for a second before moving on, you realize that this is actually a point in favor, right? This makes a case for why the plan seems to be a good plan. Then the author pulls the twist right here. It will, however, take at least 15 years to complete the project, and by then the majority of these power plants will be too old to function at full capacity. So by the time you construct and make live those 11 power plants, those new fresh minty fresh power plants, by that time your existing power plants will not be able to produce the kind of capacity you're expecting, right? If I had to put it into simple numbers, you are expecting that the current output is 100, you are going to build 100, the forecast demand is 200, is being met. The author is telling you, yeah, the forecast, you will still be able to get 100 from the new power plants, but these things which you thought will give you 100, they're going to give you only 80. Why? They won't be able, they're too old to function at full capacity. Therefore, you're still going to fall short of your target. That's the logic here, right? So by the time the new plans go live, the current won't function at full capacity. Then how are you going to meet that target? If you realize that this is essentially a point against the plan, right? So overall, then what's happening? The author concluded that it's probably not big enough to achieve the goal. Why is it not big enough to achieve the goal? While it is true that, calculation wise, if you add projected output to what is achievable now, you'll meet it. In reality, there's this practical difficulty, which means you won't actually meet it. So now that we have kind of gone through the logic, understood the logic, let's focus on that analysis, which is important, right? What is the main conclusion? I hope all of you were very clear about it. This particular proposal is not big enough to achieve that stated goal, right? Whatever that goal is, self-sufficiency in electricity production. That's the main conclusion. What is boldface 1? Boldface 1 is the actual proposal itself. And what is its relation to the main conclusion? The main conclusion essentially tells us that this particular proposal not good enough. It's not going to be able to meet its demand. It's not going to be able to meet its goal. And what is boldface 2? It's actually a factual truth as far as this particular passage is concerned. The author is giving that as, hey, this is what it is, right? But it's a point that's in favor of the proposal. surprisingly. It's a point in favor of the proposal. The rest is answer choice analysis. This much I can think about before I can go to the statements. The rest is answer choice analysis. Let me quickly see. I read that part, but with the second part it becomes false, right? This, it is true that is only about this portion, right? It is true that if you add the projected output to the output that's currently achievable, you're going to meet the forecast demand. Nothing here is being disputed. The author is telling you that this is true. Even this second point, nobody is disputing it. This is the author telling you this is true. This is a great thing about the plan, but it's not enough because of this. I hope you see that. Right? So how is BoldFace 2 inaccurate? BoldFace 2, as per the author, it's true, right? Aditya, I imply that the latter part of the part meant that the plan won't work and it's inaccurate. No, you're being asked to figure out. If you look at the question, right? The second is a claim. Okay, is the second a claim? Yeah, it would not be enough. So it's clearly a claim. It has been used in support of the plan. This is also okay, but that the argument maintains is inaccurate. So is boldface 2, which is the statement that, and again, you have to remember what we did in the first exercise, that entire bolded portion. So is the statement that if you add the projected output of the new hydroelectric plants to the output that is achievable now, you will be able to meet the forecast. Is that true or is it not true? Has the author kind of indicated anywhere or implied anywhere that this is not true? No, the author is telling you this is true. The problem is something else. Are you guys seeing it? Juan, okay. What about Aditya? Are you seeing it? There is absolutely no doubt that this statement, it's okay. So they are anticipating projected output to be 100, and if the current output that's achievable now is 200, it will meet the forecast demand, which is 300. Nobody is denying this. This, as per the author, it is true. The problem is the next sentence. The problem, while this is true, this calculation will work out. In reality, you are expecting current demand to be 200. 15 years later, it won't be. As of now, it is 200, but 15 years later, it won't be. So in reality, this is going to become 150. That's a different issue. Nobody has told us boldface 1 is inaccurate. The author, in fact, explicitly tells you it's accurate. I hope you guys are seeing this. Great. So BF2 is hardcore accurate. I won't even say we don't know whether it is accurate or not accurate. The author is telling us it's accurate. It's that crystal clear if you understood this. So just to summarize, the main conclusion, it's not big enough to achieve the goal. The proposal, that is, boldface 1 is the proposal. Boldface 2 is actually a point in favor of the proposal. Now, why is choice D wrong? Only because of this one stretch. Everything else in in choice D is right. The first introduced a proposed plan, correct. For achieving a certain goal, correct. And again, look at it, I'm going piece by piece. The second is a claim that has been used in support of the plan, also correct. Is this a claim? Yeah, it's a idea that it would be able to meet the forecast demand, right? It's a claim. It's not a necessary true statement. It's a claim, no problem. It has been used in support of the plan, the proposal, also correct. But that the argument maintains is inaccurate. This is what I call an almost correct answer. This is the only issue which makes choice D incorrect. Which is why, if you look at the stats for this, you have around 40, 45, 46% of people choosing this. And the only reason for that is it's almost right. You just have to pay attention to this too and figure it out. Choice E, interestingly, is right. And again, the evaluation of the plan. Evaluation is not a term that we discussed. So we have to think commonsensically and figure out why that is right. The first introduced a proposed plan for achieving a certain goal. That's right. Absolutely no problem. The second bolded portion, it provides evidence that is used to support the argument's evaluation of the plan. Okay, how is that happening? Think about what the word evaluation means. Some of us know this from the RC context, but think logical, common sense. What is evaluation? To evaluate something is to assess something. To evaluate someone is to assess someone. Then you ask the question, how do you assess something? You think about the pros and cons, the positives and the negatives typically, and then you arrive at a final decision, right? End of the day, if I am evaluating whether or not I should implement AI into my office workflows, I'm going to evaluate AI. Should I use AI into my office workflows? So if I do that, what's going to work for me? What's going to work well? If I do that, what's going to be a problem? How much will it cost? Is the cost worth it in terms of return? All those assessments you have to do, right? All of that is assessment. So when I'm evaluating something, I am typically going to look at the positive sides of it, what it's going to give me, and the negative sides of it. So is an evaluation of this plan happening? I would argue yes. It is true that if you add the output, to the projected output, you'll get something. You'll be able to meet the forecast demand. That's the good side of the plan. But hold on, that's not the complete assessment. There's also a problem, and that problem is that last sentence. So overall, is my boldface one helping the author or helping the argument eventually to do an assessment of the plan? I would argue yes. So is this word evaluation something that we mugged up earlier, we by hearted earlier? No. But at this point, as we see this, let's apply some common sense. If you're not sure about this choice, keep it on hold, reject the other choices, and then let's deal with it. That's the way I would do it. If evaluation and everything I told you about assessments, right, if that doesn't click, you would do something like that. So yeah, some quick takeaways. Remember, with the last two questions, there is a strong logic component along with structure as the questions get tougher. So don't discard that. In tough questions, some level of general common sense. What does evaluation fit here? And process of elimination. If you're unsure about choice C, don't reject it, keep it on hold. Search for a proper, legit reason to reject other choices. Your D, that inaccurate, is a red flag, right? So that reliance on POE is very important. Assess both parts of the choice. Sometimes you see that boldface 1 is correct, boldface 2 is not correct. Always those things can happen. In everything that you've done here, everything that you've seen me do here, you would have seen that I'm not overly obsessed with categorizing these boldface 1 and boldface 2 very, very granularly. I really mean it when I say rough is enough. Very roughly, okay, this seems to be some evidence that's supporting the conclusion. This seems to be, the author telling me something which goes against the conclusion. It seems to be a consideration. Okay, great. Those may not be the exact words you see, but that is enough. Don't over obsess over categorizing perfectly, because that's where you have the choices. Don't waste that much time on this. Be practical here, right? But do some level of analysis before you go to the choices. I think I have convinced you to a certain level that it's a useful practice. And be wary of this choice D and these kinds of things. Almost correct. It's just that inaccurate with an issue. So we saw only one, through an actual question, we saw only one of the edge cases or fringe cases that are here. We saw a nested conclusion case. But especially with focus, there are some of these other things that I've seen. And because it's focus edition questions, I didn't want to, put it on a slide, put it in the session, because you guys will try it eventually. But here are some edge cases that are possible. I could ask a boldface question where there's no argument, it's just a passage. Possible? Be ready for it, no problem. I could even create a question where there's clearly a main conclusion that is being hinted at, but it's kind of implied. You can derive the main conclusion, but it's not really explicitly stated. And you could have questions that are testing you on the boldface aspects of such a case. So this is a case where if you're explicitly searching for a main conclusion, you won't be able to find it. So that's another fringe case. Now, I'm not putting questions on that in the interest both of time and because some of it is more recent. Here is another interesting use case. I saw this in a GMAT focus question, GMAT Prep focus edition mock. I could in an argument, nobody is stopping me from kind of expressing the conclusion again. for emphasis. I could put my premises, arrive at a conclusion, then further justify it, and then kind of restate the same idea again, just as a way to re-emphasize my final point. It feels redundant, but somebody could create an argument that way. So sometimes this can create an element of confusion if you're not ready for it. So I am done. Just to summarize, we have covered quite a bit of ground. Some of the principles we kind of ran through it as we solved. Some of the traps we discussed, my process, some basics. We've covered a lot of it. I will leave you with this slide, the process, the way to go about boldface. So, any general quick questions, any feedback? I hope you got something out of it. I did tell you 2.5 hours. You should feel a bit more comfortable with boldface. I hope that to a certain level at least has been done. Right? The word evaluation. Okay, Jack. Why is A not the answer? Let me. I didn't see that earlier. Let me come to A. Yeah. Let's look at choice A. The first provides a proposed course of action. Yeah, that's fine. For which the argument provides support. This is a bit of a red flag, if you ask me. Yeah, because if you look at what the argument is trying to do, is it really trying to provide support for this particular argument? If for this particular plan, that's a bit of a red flag for me. If you look at the argument overall, the argument is not trying to provide support for this. It's telling you that this plan is not good enough to reach its goal. It's not big enough. So, at an overall level, I think there's an issue here that with boldface 1. That's fundamentally my issue with it. E is a much better and cleaner choice. Yeah. So that's about it. Thanks, guys. Let me stop sharing then, and let's kind of, yeah. Yeah, my point is the argument is not supporting it, which is kind of the red flag, and he is a clearly better choice. That's the idea. But good, Jack. That's a fantastic question. Yeah. So next in line, at least for me, I think is strength and weaken. Wanted to do evaluate first, but at some level, uh, the aspect of the kind of thinking that the answer choice demands at some level, the foundation is built with strengthen and weaken. So the next session in my series, my verbal content series, is going to be strength and weaken. I think I've confirmed with GC that it's going to be next week, so I will be seeing some of you hopefully on next Thursday, same time. Maybe you'll get something out of it. Any other general feedback before we wrap up, or any other general questions? You guys can always reach out to me. I will be sharing a PDF of this session. There's one question which we haven't covered today. Take it as homework, solve it, and let me know how it goes. You can ask your doubts in the comments also. I will come and eventually I will solve that. I'll solve your doubts as I see it. What else? Yeah. Thanks, Rashmi, Jack, Ashish, Monica, Manan, Juan, Rishika. Good to see. Good to see all of you. And thanks for staying through. Though my general record for session length is insane, it's not. And it's I've done 4 hours, 5 hours, 6 hour sessions, but I'm genuinely trying to keep this tight. So 2.5 hours, and we should wrap up because verbal is somewhat on the intense side. Yeah, where are you going to share it? So great. So the PDF, don't worry, just give me a day. I will from my side, the PDF will be ready, and I think in the video description we'll make sure it's there, right? And you can do the question for homework. Let me know if there's any other doubts, and of course I think my general, all the usual credentials are always there. You can always reach out, whether it's LinkedIn or through otherwise. Have doubts, feel free to reach out. Happy to try and help whichever way. I think any other questions? I think we're done pretty much. Bye, Ron. Good to see all of you here. All the best for your preparation, everyone. Some of you, if you are looking for help with strength and weekend, I do have something coming up next week. Do check me out. Do check it out rather. So just stay tuned to the channel. And if you got something out of it, all the usual YouTube stuff, like, comment, whatever it is. Right. So see ya, everyone. Have a good morning or afternoon or night, wherever you are. See ya.